Hello and welcome to the Markets Hub. This is Wednesday, November 21st. Up first, we're going to talk about the U.S. fiscal cliff, which is threatening to impact more than about 90% of American households. We'll be joined by Damian Paletta, live from Washington, D.C. Well, Damian, thank you so much for joining us. Damian, we have this wonderful story in the paper today about the U.S. fiscal cliff, which is threatening to impact basically almost every American household. Why would it impact so many people? What exactly is this fiscal cliff that we've talked so much about?
Well, that's right. I mean, it would affect us on the tax side and the spending side. On the tax side, you know, taxes on at least 121 million households. That's households, you know, with parents and kids in them. Taxes would go up. We would see benefit cuts on everything from like local police stations, fire departments, things like that. So you know, the impact would be so far-reaching, it would be sort of unprecedented for a one-year cut like this to take place.
And it was interesting in the story. I mean, a lot of these the taxes that have been impacted going into this, these are going back to the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, Obama administration. These are waves of moves that the government has made over the last 2 decades, really, to help American households, and they'd all be unwound at once, right?
That's right. I mean, one of the confusing things about the current tax code is that it's really a patchwork of all sorts of different tax breaks and incentives. And every year, towards the end of the year, they all get extended, essentially punted another year or two. So this year, we have this big debate about what to do with the Bush tax rates. And that's all sort of colliding with these other expiring tax breaks, you know, things like the child tax credit and things like that, you know, estate taxes, things like that, that are all going to be up part of the same negotiations with Congress. So if things really go south and there's a breakdown in talks and we sort of go hurtling over the fiscal cliff in January, all of these tax breaks and changes to tax law are going to reset up, and that's going to have an impact on, you know, over 100 million people.
Well, this sounds really truly diabolical if they're not able to reach an agreement. I mean, this is impacting everyone from people who make less than $20,000 a year to millionaires living in penthouses in Palm Beach. I mean, it seems like every American will be impacted in some way. As you look at you know, where leaders are right now, they met last Friday. It seemed optimistic. They're taking a break this week for the Thanksgiving holiday. Will they go right back to work come Monday next week? What's the latest on whether they're actually going to come to some sort of agreement and not just punt this forward?
Well, you know, we expect them to meet next week. It might not be Monday. They might need some more time to sort of get organized. You know, my view or my sense is that, you know, they had some pretty optimistic rhetoric coming out of the meeting last week, but it's going to be tough sledding for a few weeks. I mean, once they really get down to the nitty-gritty, what to do with the Bush tax cuts, what to do with defense spending cuts, what to do with Medicare, Medicaid, and even Social Security, those are some really tough issues to sort through, and it's likely that this kind of happy talk might, you know, fade away pretty fast. So I'm expecting, you know, a few weeks at least of some pretty you know, volatile situations on the Hill and with the White House. They're definitely going to try, and they're going to try to plow through some of the easier stuff first. But once they really get to the tough issues, you know, the Bush era tax cuts and Medicare, things like that, it's going to be really tough for them to cut a deal soon, and that's why a lot of folks expect it might, you know, we might get close to Christmas before they really settle things out.
And is that, I mean, ultimately, as you mentioned, there'll be some easy going in the beginning, but is it really the Bush era tax cuts, Medicare spending, are those the big issues that you foresee that are really going to have some issues getting some bipartisan agreement on how to deal with this?
Sure. I mean, what is the big ask from Democrats in the White House is they want Bush era tax rates on the households making more than $250,000, they want those to go up. And, you know, the president's view is he just won re-election. You know, this whole thing was litigated during the campaign, and he says they're going up one way or the other. Now, Republicans disagree with that, but everyone's kind of dug in on this right now, and that's when, you know, you could go, you know, really close to the deadline if folks sort of believe that voters are with them and that they have, you know, the kind of leverage on this. And Medicare, Republicans want major changes to Medicare. It's a really expensive program. It's going to get more expensive. And they probably won't agree to some changes to the tax code unless Democrats will agree to changes in Medicare. So these are really tough issues, and they've been dividing this country for decades, and it's hard to see how they're going to, in a half-hour, 45-minute negotiating session, settle all these differences.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, also President Obama is taking the election as a backing for a lot of his beliefs on this. Is this something that, as the negotiations continue, you can see him writing a hard line in the sand that says, look, I was elected on getting these things accomplished, and we're not going to sort of budge on these things?
It's exactly what we're watching for. He's trying to do this balance right now where he's being tough but flexible. He says he's open to talks. He wants to negotiate. He's definitely put Medicare on the table, and there's a sense that Social Security might get put on the table later as far as just some minor changes to make it solvent for the next 75 years. But there could be a point when everyone goes back to their bunkers and they start throwing grenades at each other, where they do start to take election mandates and things like that, and trying to club each other with it. So at this point, everyone's talking like they want to cut a deal, but once they really get down to these tough issues, I think it's going to be a little harder, and that's when we might see some of the old politics from last year creep back into the conversation.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Damian Paletta from our office in Washington, D.C. Damian and the rest of the team down there will be covering every angle when it comes to the fiscal cliff. Please make sure to go on to WSJ.com and read the paper each morning as we look into this developing story, especially as we get into the latter part of the year.